It's good to see that everybody found their way to the room on the second try for me. We're in this room for 1 hour and we have to make do. There are not enough seats for everybody, so it'll be a little bit cozy standing up and sitting along the walls and things like this. But the first hour we'll have it a little bit cozy just to introduce the day. So this day is about working instead of, yesterday was about hearing a lot of things. Today is more about working together. And we just have 1 hour to introduce things. And to start us off, we are our host region here in Skåne. We have the Deputy Governor of Skåne, Pontus Lindberg.
Thank you. Well, before you start to work, I would like to say some word. And as all politicians, I'm just about talking, not so much about working. But it's really inspiring to be here and really feel the electrifying atmosphere. There is really some sort of anticipation in the air that here are things going to happen. I myself has followed the development in the Baltic Sea region since the mid-90s, and I must say that we have actually achieved a lot of things. We are a very competitive region in the world. We have a number of metropolitan areas. We have a high concentration of both competitive companies but also of research and development and university, and we have a reasonable good level of knowledge when we look at the population. So we have a lot of things working for us. But now it's very much up to us to get the things going. And when we finished just 3 weeks ago, writing the new Interreg 5 ÖKS program from Norway to Denmark over some parts of Sweden, we compared in the beginning all the regional strategies from all these, in all I think 16 different partner regions. And it was very clear that there was one team that was really standing out in all regions, and that was innovation. Focus on innovation, focus on actually bringing together all the knowledge, all the research and development and all the strength we have in these areas, both in the private and public sector, but now to be able to bring it together and create business, create jobs with this as a foundation. And from my perspective, we are looking at a very promising new period in the European Union. I think that we should really try to use this component of 15% to be able to work outside our various regions for structural funds and Interreg funds, and really look out in Europe and also perhaps other parts of the world to see if there is not a possibility to find another type of partner that has something little extra to add to our programs. We as a region has also seen a growing interest from other parts of Europe, other parts of Germany that we usually not cooperate with are now a little bit more interesting in us, and we think that it's because in our past there are perhaps some good ideas that they can learn from. So I would like to wish you a very fruitful day here, a very good discussion, and I really think that we can bring new ideas together and create some very interesting and positive new projects that would actually make us a little bit better off in the future. Thank you very much.
Okay, so Region Skåne, throwing the gauntlet, we're going to use our 15% and work together. Everybody find a place. The next person up is Keri McGuire, again from working with regional policy, regional economic policy at the OECD. To take us through a little bit more about the cross-border innovation activities.
Good morning. So I was asked to come here today because we have a project that will come out in about 3 weeks. The book, I saw this, they sent a mock-up yesterday, so the book is physically being produced. But we thought that there might be some interesting material in this book that focuses on cross-border collaboration for your efforts, which might be more interregional or cross-border, etc. So here we go, since we have... whoops. There we go. As Emily mentioned, I come from a division that focuses on regional development, and obviously the regional innovation strategies that you all have worked on are part of the good practices in trying to identify your unique assets to be competitive globally. And just as an aside, so the OECD does different types of reviews and has databases, so if there's a material that you're interested in, please feel free to email me and I will cheat and send you electronic versions of any report that you like. So that offer is always standing. A couple of the reviews that we have worked on that had a macro-regional perspective, just for your information, the North Atlantic region and the Pan-Yellow Sea region, which in a sense are both different sort of one more intensive hubs in Asia with a lot more people, and the other with some common challenges. But if you're interested in how these different efforts to work together in the context of a macro region have taken place, feel free and I'll be happy to share the details. This is just a quick summary because it would take too long to go through each one. So this particular study actually had several cross-border areas from the Baltic Sea region, and it also just maybe a special thank you to Region Skåne that was very active in this project. Pontus, Lindberg, Maria Lindbom had been very active in this, and there'll be full case studies available in the next 2 or 3 weeks on each one of these examples. The purpose here was to really understand when to collaborate with your neighbor, but a lot of these lessons are applicable to somebody that's not your neighbor but has other things in common. So we'll talk a little bit maybe then about when it makes sense, the factors to consider, how to manage that, and then what are the concrete instruments you can use to do that. So yesterday most of you saw this, so I just leave it in there in case they distribute the presentation, but the whole point was to say increasing global activity with respect to innovation and scientific production, but don't forget there is some issues related to geographic proximity. However, in a minute we'll talk about other forms of proximity that you'll be interested in thinking about working with different partners. So different types of proximity, and then these were the 10 categories we had put up yesterday that we were thinking about for the cross-border specifically. And I just note that this is in part inspired by some work by a researcher who the Baltic Sea stole from the Danube region. She moved from Vienna to Lund. But in any event, so I mean, this might be helpful in terms of your thinking about who the right partners are. Obviously, this cross-border integration might be less applicable in some of your cases, but I would just highlight the very interesting work in the Øresund, where they have a whole integration index that looks at a lot of different factors, culture, transport, etc. That might give some ideas, but it's a little bit less focused on innovation per se, the actual index, and more on just general integration. But I think it's interesting for the audience if you haven't seen it. It's in the book, so you'll get the full appendix is in there. So here are some of the ideas in terms of different types of proximity and innovation from a researcher named Bottomup. And so here I think is where, again, in the partner search, or for where the common, not only common innovation themes, but other forms of proximity that you have, you know, to keep this in mind. And I don't know if Goldilocks and the Three Bears translates into other cultures, but I'm seeing some nods. Well, I guess, you know, the porridge could be too hot, too cold, or just right, and the same is sometimes good with the proximity. If it's too much, sometimes you don't get enough interesting diversity. You might get more critical mass, but that's, and if it's too far apart, then you don't, it's harder to work together. So this is sort of Goldilocks meets the academic literature, I think, here. So a few sort of fun phrases to take back, and then we can go into the details. But obviously, as we mentioned, since innovation doesn't stop at the border, you have to think and act beyond the borders. But working across border, or even in this context, interregionally, goes hand in hand with competitiveness in more global networks. And we heard a couple examples yesterday, and we have a couple examples in the book of very interesting cases where they worked together to be more visible globally. So that's something presumably you would be particularly interested in. And then, you know, we'll get into more of the details on the opportunities. And I think this defining the function, here this is referring in the book to a sort of functional region, but we'll get in a minute to this variable geometry issue that's going to come up, I presume, in the different types of collaborations. And then the right conditions were referring to the table that you just saw. So in terms of this, you know, this is referring to the functional area for the book, but I think we can use this as an analogy. So we'll take the top technology region, Eindhoven, Leuven, Aachen triangle. Okay, branding issues did come up in the report, just as since that's kind of a mouthful to say. But if you take this, this was an assessment done by Back Basel on the different sort of strengths in key sectors and the subregions. Let's pretend that instead of being small units, these are countries. You can see that there were some diagnoses about who was strongest in what areas. And while they all agreed to work together on 3 big ones, I only have 2 here, the idea was that in some cases, some are going to be more interested in others, and that's why they have a very complex setup with 6 subregions, 3 countries, 4 science and technology policy regimes. So they needed to be a bit more flexible in how they approached it, but they had this sort of common agreement about how they would work together. Maybe another point on this slide was just that there are going to be all sorts of different definitions. In this case, it was talking contiguous regions, but we can make the analogy to others in that it's going to depend on the purpose. And we found that for a lot of the sort of EU territorial cooperation, the specific cross-border interreg footprints or perimeters or catchment areas, whichever word you like, they often didn't work as well for innovation because they were focused on border problems and not as much on opportunities. And I guess that's another sort of difference with the innovation work collaboration in the use of these territorial cooperation opportunities, which is newer and means that sometimes our geographies don't match exactly, and that's why at least you have the opportunity to choose in part in your strategies who you want to collaborate with. So in the governance issues, I guess, you know, just these are all sort of kind of obvious, but maybe we'll go into some details. Maybe I'll just emphasize the private sector part, because we had some examples from other places, notably North America, where it's a lot less sort of top-down public sector driven, and they have a lot more bottom-up private sector activities. And for innovation, I think it's very important to keep that in mind. And there were different strategies. One, I mean, here it's a bit more of a consensus-oriented culture, I might say. So, but in one of the cross-border areas, the private sector said we got divorced from the public sector. So, so they decided to each work on their own thing. And but there, the private sector was sometimes the driver, because they saw the interest more than the public sector. So obviously they have some good advice as to where it makes sense as well. So in terms of these benefits, we use this grid also for other kinds of collaborations. We just did some work on rural-urban partnerships, so I used exactly the same frontier and then applied it to the innovation area. But I maybe just will highlight one in particular, which is this complementarities and the diversity of assets that for the innovation work is, I think, a bit more unique relative to other types of collaboration across regions. But obviously the branding and the critical mass and the ability to develop specialized services or infrastructure, etc., are also things that might be of interest. Let's see, I thought I had, yes. So this was just a classification of the case study regions, but maybe what I'll highlight here is the time to get these things really working and the relationship building. And the word trust, which I mentioned yesterday, came up all the time. And approach one could take, because if you have to negotiate every single time about the costs and benefits and the distributions on every single project, it's so time-consuming and unwieldy. So if you, in a sense, take the game theory approaches, you can see that if it's a repeated game, then it's a lot easier to start building up not only the trust, but then for every little detail, you're not quite as caught up and is exactly split 50-50, because then, you know, there are some problems in other areas where when there's some sort of common pot, everybody needs to check that they got back their share of whatever sort of common resources were put in, and it becomes rather painful. The other challenge is going to be the level of innovation competencies and who has budgets and who can act alone and who needs to rely more on the other levels of government in order to get the funding and participate in some of the arrangements that you might be considering. Before I move on, maybe one other point on this understanding the benefits, which is that this is a field that is very, as you know, difficult to quantify what you'll get out of it, because you don't know necessarily upfront, and you can take actions over time that get more benefits. So you know, it's this information revealing process that the relationship for these arrangements will help identify how you can actually create more and more value from it, but you might not know it all up front, which it makes this a little bit trickier. In terms of the instruments, and I have, what, 2 minutes through how much? 5? Okay. So for the instruments, I guess one of the challenges was that there were a lot of projects and experiments, but they weren't necessarily contributing to a sort of common purpose in many cases of these cross-border examples. And I guess the funding issues, which for you are going to be perhaps at the regional level sort of tricky, because for different purposes you have more or less flexibility on how much you can put. And in terms of the maximum that you're allowed to use for some of these EU funds, people don't use them, so so it's still very hard to justify to constituencies why it's of interest. This is just an example of some instruments that you could consider applying on a sort of interregional basis, and we had some experiences with different ones, and I'll just highlight. So joint branding was a common one and helpful, but the actual brand name sometimes was very difficult because of political sensitivities. The sort of cluster networks, identifying common themes or areas to work in seemed to be very effective. Sometimes the cluster associations themselves, however, didn't last cross-border. So really maybe understanding within your respective regions, if you've had any experience with this, what makes them work and not work, which would be, I think, pretty helpful. I would say that also, you know, the educational, there are lots of exchanges between different universities, etc. It seemed to work easier, since universities also compete, that you had something that they both recognized as opposed to just sort of a broad everything together kind of arrangement. I would also highlight that the sort of innovation voucher programs and things where you have maybe strengths in advisory services in one location that could be relevant for another, those were also used with success in a few places. On the public procurement aspect, because of the sort of high spending on healthcare, etc. Again, this is where I was referring yesterday to the problems of regulations in sectors that can sometimes get in the way, where, you know, I can't test my product in your market because the person is not certified with this education, etc. So there were examples where there was a research center in Northern Ireland where the Irish could use and try and access the UK market, but it can be a little bit tougher. So this was just a summary of some of the things that I mentioned, but again, this some of the institutions, I mean, if you're not right next to each other, then some of these, you know, shared S&T parks, etc., might be a little more complicated. The firm networking matchmaking also tended to not always lead to concrete collaboration, so that was a sort of a warning. So to summarize, I guess I would suggest also that looking a little bit at what the data says, because there might be a lot of hubs that are already collaborating through different means, and you might want to build on that. And in the funding streams, to think about what are the mechanisms for allowing each party to participate, as was mentioned yesterday, these flexible funding issues. The easiest thing is if you just let other people be eligible in your own programs. That rarely happens. Or if it is on paper, it doesn't necessarily happen in practice. And the other is just the more that the agencies that are allocating the funds have a little flexibility, the easier it is to then do these kinds of things. So if they're sort of over strictly supervised, then it becomes a bit more painful. And if not, then if there are lots of activities together, then you can think about just designing the alignment of the program rules. And I think, given time, we'll probably stop there. But ultimately, for the longevity, finding a reason why politicians in your area will see the benefits, and your job of trying to justify and explain those benefits is I think probably a pretty crucial one as well. So I guess I'll stop there, and then.
And we have, thanks. We have a couple minutes for a couple questions. I've understood. So are there any questions from the audience? No questions. I have one, based on your last remark, that might be to you and it might be a bit to Pontus. When you talk about giving politicians a reason to care, and you also mentioned the need to have some kind of to look at the data, what kind of things are good things to monitor? What are trends that are good things to monitor that give the story to the politicians to show that it's having a result or it's making a difference? Do you have any recommendations? And then maybe Pontus could say things that you're like to tell the nice story about.
Okay, maybe on the data point, obviously just trying to understand where there are existing relationships, whether it's through universities, firms, value chains, etc., is probably pretty helpful to get a sort of lay of the land. What we've heard in other places is that in terms of convincing the politicians, everybody wants jobs. So anything that whether the relation is more or less tenuous, jobs is ultimately what many are asking for, and so that's how a lot of the organizations had to try and spin their the benefits in order to get long-term buy-in.
Well, you are right, Karen. We are, of course, interested in jobs, but we could also be interested in student exchange, exchange within the school system, and all aspects where we can see that we are in the forefront, where we are global competitive. That is always interesting for a politician, because then we can shine a little bit together with what we are good at. So it's something in there, I think.
Yeah. You're more enlightened than many politicians around the world, so that's it.
That's great to hear. All right, we're going to move on to the last little bit of introduction coming from our Scandinavian friends who are located in the Smart Specialization platform in Sevilla, Spain. So coming to us from Spain, our Swedish colleague Jens Sörvik and Norwegian colleague Inger Midtkandal.
Okay, welcome to this workshop, and I must say this is a fantastic group. You have we organize a lot of workshops all across Europe, and this has never been the problem before, but it works, and we're going to stay here for another half an hour, and then we're going to split into smaller sessions. So, Jens and I work at the S3 platform in Sevilla. today is not going to be about the Baltic Sea region or the strategy for the Baltic Sea region. It's not going to be about the BSR Stars or StarDust, but it's going to be about the research and innovation strategies for smart specialization. And of course, but we're in the Baltic Sea region, and we're within a macro region, and we're not going to forget everything that we talked about yesterday. We're going to keep it as a framework for what we're going to do today. So we're going to give you the elevator pitch to what is smart specialization and why we have smart specialization. We're going to introduce very shortly and briefly the platform. Then we're going to talk about priorities. The priorities that are made in the research and innovation strategies, and give you some pictures and opportunities of what you can use and what can be interesting for you in the future. And then we're going to give you the structure of the day and what we're going to achieve. So, very short, structural funds. The biggest pot of money in the European Commission, given to the region, 1/3 of the budget. Research and innovation has, in this period that we are ending now, been about 25%. This is what I want you to remember. The rest of the money is spent on different things. Useful things, but on different things. So, what are we asking now? What has been the impact of all this money in the last 7 years? What's the impact? We had a discussion, we had a presentation from Marek yesterday. There's some lessons, there's something that has been good and something that hasn't been not so good. So, how has the money been spent? So now we're not talking about spending, we're talking about investment in the future. So in this, here you go. In the new programming period, starting from 2014, the Commission says, okay, this 25% of the cake, we want to increase that. We want to have more investment for the future. So now the Commission says that you will need to spend up to 80% of the money that you before spent on general average, 25% of, on research innovation, SME competitiveness, energy efficiency, and ICT. Up until 80% for the developed regions, recent regions, and 50%. It's a huge increase. It's a lot of money. But how is that money going to be invested? So before all the regions across Europe are given this money, the Commission says you need to have a good strategy on how to spend the money. And that is the research and innovation strategy for smart specialization. Simple as that. So, you have to have a strategy, all the regions or member states. It's going to be a lot of money. It's going to be a lot more money for research and innovation in the structural fund than in Horizon 2020. And this money are not, they have different rules around them. So they have different structures. And then you can choose which of the priorities, or which of the thematic objectives, but you have to have at least 2 of them, and at least research and innovation. Go. Wrong way. Okay, so what is smart specialization? What is this research and innovation strategy for smart specialization? First of all, I want you to know that we're not, we're building on the past. All the regions across Europe, or most of them, you have experience with RIS processes. But notice, RIS is Regional Innovation Strategy. RIS 3 is not Regional Innovation Strategy, it's Research and Innovation Strategy. That is one change. And then, we're building on the past and we're breaking with the past. We're building on the past in the way that the strategy is about efficient investment for research and development and innovation for growth and employment. Okay, that's not necessarily something new. But then, what's new is also that you need to coordinate. You need to coordinate EU strategies, national strategies, regional strategies, maybe private companies have their strategies, and you need to coordinate multi-level and multilateral. You may have a ministry or somebody dealing with economy, somebody dealing with science and education, somebody dealing with agriculture, somebody dealing with fishery, I don't know what. You need to coordinate laterally as well. And you need to be outward looking. Because one of the lessons from the past is that we all worked in silos. Europe had 27 and now 28 different research innovation strategies, not coordinated. I mean, you might be best in your country. You really might be best in the country. But if you're mediocre in the world, or just, then it doesn't really matter. Or at least you need to know that you are, not really on top. And you deal with it. And you need to coordinate with private funding. And remember, this is not a strategy just for the structural funds. This is not a strategy just for the operational programs. It's a strategy that is broad, takes on what you have as strategies, and coordinate. That's one thing. Another thing is how you make the strategy. It's not supposed to be written in an office, in a ministry, somewhere by some clever people with fantastic academic degrees. You need to have a bottom-up process where you engage the stakeholders. And now I need my note because there are 3 things I need to say about this. The process is about entrepreneurial process of discovery. It's about finding what you have, what force you have in the regional member, what are the possibilities for the future, and how do you find these possibilities? How do you involve the stakeholders? How do you involve the universities, the educational institutions? How do you involve your business enterprises? How do you involve the SMEs, the clusters, then the public authorities? How do you involve them so that they all believe in this is a strategy that we're all going to follow, and we're all going to get aligned, and we move together in the same direction, hopefully the right one as well. And then how do you reach the priorities? Because you need to prioritize. There are less money than before. Okay, it's got a lot more to research and innovation, but still less money. Europe is in crisis. You need to narrow down to a few priorities that you choose, and with you can succeed in the future. Jens is going to talk about that later. So, and you have 15% that you can spend outside of your region or your country. So this is what I'm going to talk about today. How do we work together to connect our strategies and to connect activities and the implementation of the strategies? How are we going to spend those 15%? Okay, so some of the countries, or some of the regions have worked fantastically well on research and innovation strategies. Some don't know, sometimes maybe not all regions really know what a strategy is, and they never made one before. So the Commission sent up an S3 platform where we work. It's kind of like a help desk for regions. It was designed to assist the regions. It's 2.5 years old. It's based in Sevilla. It's still a part of the Commission structure, but we're in Sevilla, so we're a bit far away. So sometimes we use that for our benefit. Sometimes we also feel too far away. We have 10 DGs in our steering group. Some say that this is one of the first times that actually the DGs also managed to coordinate laterally in a good way. The regions and the countries that we work with, they register with us. In the beginning, when I started 2 years ago, we had 19 regions. And we were like, 19 regions, yeah, we can work with 19 regions. Now we have 142 regions. We have 14 countries, member states, that decided to register with us. And we have 2 non-EU regions that want to do this, not because they have to, but because they want to. Because this is the new generation of research and innovation strategies. Okay. So what do we do? We're not going to take you through all of it, but we made a guide with the 6 steps that you've seen before and you saw yesterday. We had a lot of workshop, peer review workshop, trainings, thematic workshops. We have country and macro-regional events, like this one. This would fit here. And we have some tools you can find on the internet. And then we have a tool called I at Registry, and Jens will take you through that.
Hello. Oh, yeah, good. Hi, I'm Jens, and I'm a colleague of Inger's, and I'm actually from Lund and Malmö, so it's nice to be back here as a visitor. What we are going to talk about now is with priorities. As Marek was mentioning yesterday, it's important to start prioritizing where you put your money. I think sometimes there is actually a little bit of misconfusion as well around here, because what is mentioned is that you have to invest in 11 thematic objectives and you have to prioritize among those ones. But on top of that, within research and innovation, it's also asked that regions should find out prioritized sectors and areas. For example, here in Skåne, they have said that we will prioritize smart cities, e-health, and smart materials in order to focus the resources. However, these prioritized economic activities areas does not mean that you should not do horizontal measures, but you will do both horizontal measures, saying innovation vouchers for SMEs, but also that for some kind of areas, there are some kind of activities that can only be carried out when you have a certain amount of critical mass and where there is a greater potential. And what these prioritized areas are, it's not a sector, it can be a niche within a sector or a meeting of sectors of cross-sectoral activities, but trying to find a unique potential for the region. And what we can see is that regions are, we are being reviewing draft strategies and also draft operational programs and expert assessments to regions. So we can see that regions around Europe have something between 3 to 15 priorities. I would say that 15 is maybe a bit on the higher end, but that depends also on which kind of region you are and what kind of capabilities you are in your region. For example, one interesting case is this is in Mallorca, in the Balearic Islands. They have ICT for tourism. They have a great tourism sector and they have a quite interesting ICT sector. So they're trying to develop new kind of softwares to give support to the ICT for the tourism industry, but the information systems for that. And I know our friends from Lapland, where are they? Over here. They are thinking about different kind of security or safety solutions for the tourism industry as well. So that's another kind of finding a niche within the niche where you can have something unique. And this is because what was seen in the previous programming period is that a lot of regions around Europe, they were going for, we're going to have ICT Valley, we're going to have Nanotech Valley, we're going to have Biotech Valley, and everyone was going for more or less the same things. There are still a bit of a danger here in this, still with the new upcoming program period, because we have these, the fixed amount that is going for renewable energy, etc. But we will see how things develop. And also what we have been doing in our area is to provide, to try to give a bit of support to regions in saying, in trying to find out what are other people doing. So how can we position ourselves and where can we maybe find some partners to work with? Because there's also, has been emphasized by Marek yesterday and also by Inger today, that collaboration is needed and that's the future. And also, if you look at all the business networks and innovation networks, businesses are working globally, academics are working globally, and as a regional authority, you have to face this. How are we going to support and act with our actors? We have to work globally as well. Then coming back again to our database, what we have done is that we've, since priorities then are both about cross-sectoral things and you have to take into account what kind of, there are a number of top EU programs that you could connect to and also find funding from. It's pretty hard to fit in what these kind of priorities are within a standard NACE code. So we couldn't make a database just sorting from a standard NACE code because we also want people to seek out the innovative niches. So in order to upload, come back in, this database is a place where you can put up your priorities, what kind of priorities you have in your region. We have been starting to fill it out. And at the moment we have around 700 priorities for 100 regions. And it's both ourselves that have been uploading information from what we have been finding out at peer reviews, what people have been presenting as their priorities, but also from reading experts' assessments and the national strategies, etc. These are not the final ones. So there's a very different granularity. There are some regions saying we're going to invest in ICT, and for sure this will not be the end result. But this is what there is at the moment. So this is sort of a temporal database where you can find out the information. And there's also fixed categories to search for and filter around the priorities, but there are also text descriptions where you can describe your priority. And for the Baltic Sea area, we have data on 42 regions and 8 countries and around 201 priorities. These are the ones covered in the database. And the most common ones then are sustainability, priorities within sustainability. And you have connection to energy here, quite a strong connection to energy with 37. ICT, obviously in digital agenda, 25 priorities. Health, 24. Tourism is quite popular in experience-based economy. Agriculture, food, and transport. And these are quite also linked to thematic objectives and real needs in the region, so that's why it's common here. public health. A lot of regions are actually also service providers in this area, so it's a national area to do innovation. And today we're going to talk about e-health, and we found out that there are 8 regions around the regions of the ones that we have data on that are going into e-health. And we have Estonia here today, and we have Skåne here today, and we have Northern Ostrobothnia as well, so we have managed to find a few of them. Smart cities is another one. There are 9 priorities in 9 regions. We have tourism, and here's everything from tourism to experience-based economies. We actually found some who are more niche down and saying health tourism. We have in Finland, Etelekaria, and from Poland, I will not try to pronounce that, sorry, it's too tough. And then, as I was mentioning before, tourism safety in Finland. And then quite a lot of regions are also going this with the KETS, which means key enabling technologies, which is very strongly driven. There's a lot of activity going on around that. There are 6 key technologies, micro nano electronics and photonics and biotech. But also we have, because we have 2 regions here today that will talk about advanced manufacturing and another one on advanced material, and there are quite a lot of interest of that around the Baltic Sea. That was a bit of the overview. We'll try to get into the objectives of the day once again to put you in the right context here. So the objectives of the day is to have people who are involved in developing the regional innovation strategies. It's not only the civil servants writing the strategy, but actually also people from academia, companies, and interest organizations taking part in writing and developing this strategy. To give them a platform for meeting and finding possible areas of collaboration and start taking concrete steps of starting to collaborate, and hopefully to start the future for future collaboration. And also to put a little bit of pressure on that, and also to give a real area of following up, we will have a future session in this spring in Estonia. So today also we really want you to, when you discuss, have that in mind. Okay, what can we do and what can we do? And then we will meet the next time in Estonia. We hope that you would like to start going bilateral, multilaterally as well to collaborate. But that's a possibility for a next meeting. Where is Christian? Here, Christian. Here's the next host. Okay, I'll leave the...
So, is it on? Yeah. So what we're going to do today, when we leave this room, we're going to split into 3 different sessions. And in this morning session, before lunch, we're going to discuss what do we want to achieve between the registry of the Baltic Sea region and why. Why do we want to achieve this? We're going to have presentations from 3 to 6 presentations in the 3 different sessions. The presentations will give more or less concrete proposals on what they would like to cooperate on. Then we're going to discuss these possibilities. We're going to maybe identify new possibilities. Maybe from the floor there are more possibilities coming up after yesterday and after today's presentations. Then we're going to agree on, in the groups, what of these suggestions we would like to explore further. And we're going to form smaller groups depending on this. Then we're going to have lunch. In the afternoon session, when you come back from lunch, you go into the smaller groups that are already identified in the morning session. And each of the groups will elaborate on, the suggestion they have chosen, 1 per person. Why do we want to do this? Who needs to be involved when we are working on this? Is it clusters, companies, regional authorities, national authorities, EU level? How do we do it? How do we work? And Karen has given us a fantastic introduction this morning also on possible ways of working together and what works and what not. And what are we going to achieve with this work? And when are our next steps? And when do we finish? Then we're going to sum up from the groups. Then we're going to have a closing session back in this room. Short session as well, so you will manage to stand along the wall after these working sessions. And we're going to report back from parallel session, and we're going to see what we bring towards Estonia in the spring. So how do we work forward? If you give the next slide. You will be giving a quite challenging job at the tables. But we have these 5 questions for you. What, when, how, who, and why. these colors are a bit strange, but they also have 5 different colors, and to help you through the process. They come in an order. There's a reason why they stand in this order, because we believe that you cannot wait with the question why you're doing things at the very end, because if you really don't find a rationale for what you're doing, you're going to spend you're going to waste a lot of time, and you need to change it. So you might not get through all the 5 questions, all the 5 steps, and you can take them in parallel, and you can, you organize your own work in your own groups, but I'm going to insist that you spend time on why in the beginning, so you have a common ground and a common understanding across the table. Okay, we have some cultural similarities here, but we also have some cultural differences, and people communicate in different languages. Understand together why you're doing it, and then work on who needs to be involved, how do you need to work, what we'd like to achieve, and what will be the next steps. Yeah? So, we're going to now move into 3 sessions. A session on e-health, where suggestions from Skåne, from Oulu, and from Estonia. It's going to be Michaela Mariulis who will be the moderators. Would you stand up, please? They will guide you through the session. Do they need to bring the chairs back? How was that? No, they don't need. There are chairs in the room. Okay, good. Because we stole your chairs for this room. And it's going to be in the room sun, which is in that direction, and up one floor. So people will guide you around here. Then we have sustainable cities. You're going to stay in this room, lucky you. Just wait until the rest of us leave. Karen and Ulf, who you know from yesterday, will moderate. And we're going to have suggestions from Skåne, Tampere, Hamburg, West Pomerania, and Estonia. I read all the presentations. There's a lot of interesting stuff here. A lot of interesting material. And you find them all on web also. The last session, the open session, which is a bit with different topics on it, and also horizontal topics, I think it's going to be very interesting. Jens and I will moderate, and we're going to have presentation from Lapland, from West Pomerania, from Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, Skåne, Germany, no, Skåne, Denmark, and Tampere. Yeah. Skåne, Denmark, and Tampere. Okay. Any last words, or we just move on and yeah, yes, of course.
There is an issue that we didn't manage to discuss yesterday about really the clarification. Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Anna Dinido. I'm working for Lund University, the Triple Helix Innovation Platform, ELU Open. We're open for collaboration, by the way. The question is about really the clarification, and I take the opportunity because the politician is here about the 15%. The logic behind it, in fact. If the 15% is just at the discretion of the regions of being able or not to use this 15% for transnational collaboration, I think this is a huge number. This is a lot of money, especially for not so developed regions. I can very well understand why the EU representative said that they are protective of this money. At the same time, if the Commission would have decided to give the opportunity to have 2% extra of the money under the condition that they would use it for collaboration, I have a gut feeling that it would allow the regions to really seek collaborations internationally. Am I wrong? Is this logic different? I mean, what is your opinion about that?
Well, I think you have a point, but I think that you have a point, but I think we have to go with the system that we now seem to be coming to have and make the best of that. And then there will be another program period in the future, and we will learn to that also.
Any more questions? Smart specialization, process of the day, structure? No, crystal clear. Let's go and work. Okay, so bring your, you don't need to bring anything, just bring yourself.
Being our moderators of the open session, so look
Yeah. Thank you.